Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's Damron. We're playing Remnant from the Ashes. First off, if you all haven't played this game, I highly recommend it. It is a sleeper title. This game is awesome. The builds, the bosses, all this game really is absolutely wonderful. So again, if you haven't played it, you should definitely check it out. This is going to be a video that is kind of in combination with my survival guide in order to help us get the achievements to beat 10 plus bosses consecutively in one survival run. In this particular video, we're going to be covering every boss that you could possibly encounter. There's 28 different bosses in survival mode, and you can encounter them, randomly. It doesn't, you don't know which one you're going to get first, second, third, all the way to 28. And so I'm going to cover all the bosses in this video, the first of which is the Barbed Terror. This is one of the more challenging bosses in the game, but what I'm going to do throughout this video is I'm going to show you the different attacks of the bosses and how you can kind of counter those. Again, I'm not going to be going over the builds and the different mods and all these things that I'm using. I'm going to have a separate video for that where I'm going to show you guys some really great builds that are going to help you get through this super easy. So nonetheless, let's go ahead and get into the first boss. There's 28. I'll have everything timestamped, so if there's a particular boss you want to go to, feel free to check the comment or the description. I'll also have linked in the description my build video and all of that, where we're going to talk about not only the builds but the weapons, the particular worlds and how we approach those, everything. So the Barbed Terror is one of the harder ones. Again, I kind of showed the beginning of me just kind of shooting it in the face. That's its weak spot, all the eyes on its face. There's really only two kind of main attacks you have to worry about, and that are the spikes that are going to be shooting at you. You saw them, they just come from in front of me right there. They can come from the front of you, they can come from the left, or they can come from the right. And those do a lot of damage, and you just want to roll dodge towards the way that the spikes are coming. Not only do they do a lot of damage, but they're going to corrode you, and that's going to make all the other attacks that the Barbed Terror does significantly harder and more problematic. The other main attack is just his huge kind of a melee attack with his almost scythe arm, and he's either just going to slam that down right on top of you, or he's going to do a swinging slash that kind of goes horizontal all over, away from the whole thing. And you just have to time your roll dodge right there. It's pretty easy to roll dodge. The way you want to roll dodge with the spikes is you want to roll dodge towards the direction that they're coming from. So these ones coming from straight ahead, right? If I was standing in their path, I would have rolled straight forward. Where you're going to get kind of tripped up in his attacks is where the spikes are coming and then he's simultaneously doing his melee attack, because sometimes you'll be roll dodging to avoid the spikes, and you'll kind of immediately stand up and then get hit by his scythe attack. One of the things that I do want to mention in this fight is you saw my buddy go down and I did not even attempt to revive. In this fight, generally speaking, whenever he's doing his attacks, his phases, right, the spikes coming from the wall or his melee attack, you're generally not going to have enough time to revive your teammate. If you go for those revives, you're probably going to die. Unless you get it, to the point right in the middle of the fight, he'll kind of be stunned and he kind of falls over and he's not doing any attacks. At that point, you can probably go for a revive. So this is just kind of a different playthrough. The other one we were on boss level 14. You can see we're on boss level 4 here. You can see obviously his damage is going to be a lot more. So the earlier on that you face the Barbed Terror, generally the easier he is. That kind of makes sense, right? As that boss level or enemy level goes up throughout survival mode, then the fights get a little bit more challenging. Nonetheless, using corrosion on him is very, very good. His attacks do corrosion, so if you want to use a green leaf prior to coming in to kind of reduce the percentage of the corrosion damage that you get, you can. You can also have the green leaf on a quick bar when you go to fight him, so keep that in mind, that the corrosive damage, that's going to be problematic if you take it, and then his scythe damage is going to do a lot to you. When you do beat him, you'll get the unstable quills. That's a very, very good mod if you're going to run a corrosive build. If you want to combine that with, say, Swarm, you can certainly do a lot of enemy damage with corrosion on enemies that have a lot of armor, aka a lot of the bosses. And I'll show you later my other video about the builds. Using Swarm and corrosive is a really great way to maximize your damage output to those bosses. So let's get moving on to boss number 2. And that's going to be Canker, and Canker is probably the easiest boss that you're going to come across in survival mode. This is an enemy, Ixillis enemy that's found in kind of one of the coarsest regions, and he's very, very easy. It's almost a race against time, so to speak, because as you're fighting Canker, the water levels in the arena will rise, and he basically will just run around the room, and he'll be dropping corrosive bombs onto the floor. And it's very easy because you simply just have to stay away from those, and really where we like to stay is just right where you come in. in. So this is the door in which you enter this arena. You can just stay here, and even when this water rises, you're likely not going to be near any of those bombs, because the way it works is if you get close to them, they will explode and do corrosive damage to you. Also, his weak spot is kind of his front central face. He does have resistance from damage from behind, and he also has 15% damage resistance to corrosive damage, which makes sense because he's doing corrosive damage himself, so he's not going to be that affected by corrosion. Every once in a while, you'll see he'll do this kind of sound wave attack, which will create this large water wave that will be coming at you. You'll see him do it right here. He'll kind of just almost like slap his hands together, I guess. I don't know if they're hands, but it'll create a water wave, and you essentially just need to dodge roll through that, and that's pretty easy. And that's essentially the whole fight. Doesn't have a lot of health. You just have to stay away from these corrosive bombs. Kill the enemies that will be coming in to help. He'll spawn them in. Some infected swamp elves will kind of come in here and there. You don't really have too much to worry about as long as you stay kind of on the wall. So again, look, you can see the water has rose a little bit, and eventually it would rise high enough that you wouldn't be able to see those bombs. But it's really, really easy. Again, one of the easiest fights. When you do beat him, you'll get the corrosive aura mod, which gives you a 5-meter aura that moves with you, and it, you know, applies corrosion to anything that it touches, and it can stack up to 6 times and last for 30 seconds. So it's actually pretty good against some bosses to stack that against them. So let's get moving on to the third boss. And the third boss that we're going to be covering is Claviger. Claviger is one of the world bosses that you can face when you're going through the ROM areas. Again, in the survival mode, every third kind of level, so to speak, is going to be a world boss. Claviger is really easy. He's going to have a protective shield that's going to have 2 orbs on his left and right there to destroy before you can do damage to him. So keep that in mind. He is also weak to shock damage and corrosive damage. I'll show you in a little bit. Corrosion does wonders to him. He also has resistance to radiation, so radiation weapons and mods aren't going to do that much damage. Another attack that you're going to see him do is he'll launch his radiation ray kind of out of his chest. It's a large beam. Obviously, you want to stay out. It's going to do radiation damage to you, right? You really don't want to deal with that, but nonetheless, it's generally relatively avoidable. Every once in a while throughout the fight, once you've kind of done enough damage, he'll kind of slam the platform that you're on and rotate it, and when he does that, you're going to be stuck up in the air, and 2 more of those protective shield orbs are going to spawn. Now during that, he's going to be shooting his fire electricity orbs at you. So there are these kind of small attacks that you can see there. Very easy to side strafe those. As long as you're just kind of side strafing, you really shouldn't have to worry too much about those particular attacks. And when, you know, obviously when you kill those orbs, not only can he take damage, but he also has kind of a, you know, brief moment of total vulnerability where he's not really going to be doing anything. Also keep in mind, if you haven't killed the anointed adds by the time he slams down, he will slam and absorb them. So you don't really want that to happen. You do want to kill, you do want to kill those anointed adds as quickly as you can, and you can kind of minimize these rotations if you have high DPS, and I will show you that here in a minute with the corrosive build. And again, I'm just mentioning all my builds I'm going to do as a separate video. This is just a compilation of all the bosses that you can see throughout this survival playthrough as we're trying to get the achievements to kill 10 of these bosses in a row. So nonetheless, you know, the Claviger's not too bad. He's kind of big, he's kind of scary looking, but he's really not too bad. You just got to, you know, stay out of that radiation ray and those fire electricity orbs and take down those protective shields, and you should be able to take him down pretty quick. Now this is just another playthrough. I'm using the beam rifle again, and you know, I don't really recommend the beam rifle for him because it does radiation damage, but nonetheless, I do want to show you that we're running, you know, me and my partner in this particular playthrough, we're running a lot of corrosive damage. So he's using a corrosive ability swarm on the enemy, and you can see we have 5 stacks of corrosion on him as well as some burn damage from hot shot. And look at his health, right? Big difference. We're even on boss or, you know, enemy level 10 in this particular playthrough, and you can see when you have that corrosive damage on him, it really melts this boss relatively fast. So I highly recommend, if you have some corrosive ability, this is a boss you want to apply it to, and once you do, you'll see his, you know, his health's going to melt off really fast. So when you kill him, the item that you're going to be able to get is the World Breaker, which is a melee weapon. I'm not, you know, really big into the melee builds in survival mode, but this is a concussive hammer. It's going to be able to do not only just regular attacks, but if you do a charge attack, it creates an explosive force, so technically it has explosive damage. So let's get moving on to our next boss. The fourth boss that we're going to be covering is the Dream Eater, one of the more challenging challenging bosses in my opinion. He's an Iskall enemy, very similar to the actual elite that you're going to find in the Corsus dungeons, just a larger version of him. He's a very challenging boss. He's pretty scary looking, but he's going to do a lot of attacks that are pretty dangerous, and they're going to scale off of how many players you have in the game. So basically what I mean is he summons purple husks later in the fight, and depending on how many players that you have, that's how many husks are going to spawn. So he is weak to fire damage and radiation damage, so if you have those, feel free to use them. Corrosion's going to help you as he has a lot of armor. Throughout the fight, he is going to spawn some, illusion type ads. You're seeing this right here, and when you shoot them, it will automatically shoot a projectile at the person who killed the illusion, so be ready for that. And he's a very scary enemy. He moves around really fast. One of the attacks he does is shifting charge. He's going to do that to me right here. He's basically going to rush at you and do a combo lingering melee attack that really can do a lot of damage to you. And then he also summons these purple husks. Again, these are the ones that I talked about. He is going to summon those based on the number of players you have in the game, and they do quite a bit of damage. If they hit you with a 2 or 3 or 4 hit combo, you're going to be left with very little health left. Then you're going to go into phase 2, in which he's going to go up into the ceiling and spawn a lot of illusion ads throughout, as well as up in the ceiling. And again, as you see, as I'm killing him, it shoots like a ball at me. You have to find the real version, and he's right there. I see him. I'm like, oh, is there anything else around me? Because I need to kill him. Because what you need to know right here, okay, you can hear that kind of going, and the floor is getting very bright white. After about 35 seconds, he's going to land a large AoE attack on the ground of this area, and it does a ton of damage. Likely will wipe your entire crew, because you're probably going to be hurt a little bit. Generally, it's not something that you're going to survive, so you have to find the original boss clone who's hanging up on the ceiling amongst all the illusion ads that he's put up there with him, and basically do enough damage to him to prevent him from doing that AoE. So this is a really tough fight. He does a lot of things really quickly. I think the best thing you can do in that fight is just to do as much damage as fast as possible. I know that sounds kind of silly, but what I mean by that is hit him with some corrosion and use some fire damage. I think that that's really important in that particular fight. What you're going to get for beating that boss is the Rift Walker weapon mod. I don't particularly use it that much in survival mode, but you are going to enter a rift and you'll summon a clone behind you that will basically aggro anything within 12.5 meters. You'll be invulnerable and your movement speed is increased, and once that is over, it will explode and deal damage. So it's okay, it's a decent DPS, but there's a lot of better options out there. All right, next up is going to be Erfor the Jackal. This is going to be in the Jackal Den. He's part of Resium, which is one of the DLC zones. I do recommend, highly recommend, if you get this boss battle, I highly suggest you take some spice root before you go into it so you can have some freezing resistance. I also recommend that you put it onto your quick bar during this fight so you can use it if you get if you're starting to get frozen, because if you do get frozen, then a next attack can just straight end you. You won't go down, you'll just straight die, and you're going to see me make that mistake actually during this fight. He is really weak to fire and radiation, and also the weak points on Erfor is actually his legs. So if you're shooting him in the legs with fire damage, you're going to get a lot of damage points. So you can see right here, I was frozen and I had to use a spice root, because if I didn't, the next attack could actually kill me. After you do a decent amount of damage to him, he will kind of spawn some mole rats and mole bombers that are going to come and attack you, and while that's happening, he's going to be up on the ledge above you throwing these large ice rocks at you. Now the rocks will definitely do a lot of damage and they'll hurt you, but they'll also break the wooden floor that's around the map, and you'll start to have holes in the arena, and if you fall in those holes, you will die. So keep that in mind. So the arena can change a little bit, so be very careful of those holes. Obviously, falling in those holes will result in instant death. So I'll flip to another playthrough just to show you some more of the attacks that he does. Whenever he's here, he's obviously hurling ice, rocks at you, but he'll also slam on the ground, and he'll do that 2 consecutive times. Those slams send a shockwave that will freeze you if it hits you. So you saw me kind of dodge one, and then I got hit by one. But you can just kind of roll dodge forward or backwards to dodge that. If you get really close to him while he's on the kind of platform itself, he'll also just do like a punch attack, but you know, just keep your distance from him and you'll kind of avoid that. This is probably the easiest boss of the Remnant DLC bosses. The weapon mod that you're going to get upon killing him is the Cold Spear, which does a lot of initial frost damage and applies 3 stacks of frostbite, so it can actually freeze enemies as well, but it's not really going to freeze a boss, so it's okay if you're running a frost build. But other than that, let's get moving on to our next boss. The 6th boss that we're going to be covering is Gorefist. He can be found in Earth, one of the Earth locations whenever you're going through. He is essentially part of the root race, which makes him susceptible to fire damage. He is resistant to rot damage, obviously. He's not too bad. He's basically got a big cleaver that he's going to chase you with. What I like to do, and what we like to do, is just run immediately to the right and come into this room here. It's a little bit more open, and it's going to allow you to kind of dodge his attacks. Corrosion really works well on him because he has a lot of armor, and he's going to kind of do this triple swing, this kind of slicing attack. You really just need to dodge that. Just be aware that he's going to do several of those attacks in a row. Now, throughout this fight, he's also going to be spawning some of the rot wart spawns. You're not going to see him in this because we end up killing him really quickly, so I'm going to show you a second playthrough in which we also attack them. But this one here, you can really see that the corrosion damage really makes attacking him do significantly more damage. Now, when he enrages and he activates his Mantle of Thorns, which is the weapon mod that he's going to give you for winning this fight, he'll take 200% less melee damage. So he's not really an enemy that you want to try to use melee builds against. You kind of want to use your range, stay away from his cleaver, and just keep pounding away. Also, when he uses that Mantle of Thorns, he's going to spawn those 2 rot warts in, and I showed you they come at you, and they're not really going to do a lot of damage, but if they explode next to you, it stuns you, and that stun gives him an opportunity to hit you. Now, when you beat him, he's going to give you the Mantle of Thorns weapon mod, which reduces melee damage taken and also reflects melee damage. So it's really nice if you have a kind of tank build or you're using a melee weapon build, you can activate that and switch to your melee weapon and get in the fight. Alright, so we're moving on to our 7th boss in this guide, and that's Ikro the Ice Conjurer. He's also in Remnant, part of the DLC. He's one of the harder bosses of the DLC section, and obviously, like all the pretty much other guys in this DLC, he's going to be susceptible to fire damage and radiation, and he's resistant to frost damage. This is a pretty tough fight. As soon as it spawns, you want to either go to the left or the right, split up, and you need to get into this cover that is going to have cover above us as well as a small wall in front of us. There's going to be an Ice Conjurer sitting right there, that sphere. You need to take that out as fast as possible because it's shooting just non-stop ice shots at you, and you can see that's why I was standing behind this wood right here, because it was hitting that. Also, going around clockwise, you can actually see across from me is a small storm cloud. You can see it just across from me. There's 2 of them, and they go clockwise around the map, and they drop ice down from those clouds, and those will do a lot of damage to you. But as long as you get into cover like I am now, we're also protected from above us. Ultimately, the wood above you will damage enough that it will come through and do damage to you, but this fight shouldn't last that long. You should be able to do enough damage. So you see there's a storm cloud above me right now dropping down that damage. So that's something that you need to be aware of, and then when the conjured ice spawns above him, you need to take that out as quick as possible because it's launching those ice attacks at you. Now, not only is it going to do damage, but it can also freeze you, so if you want to have some spice root, keep that in mind as well. One thing that I will recommend, and I'll show another playthrough here, one of the things that really help out in this fight is having summoned enemies like, you can either have Good Boy or you can have Iron Sentinels, something that you can throw down to dish out a little bit of extra damage. One of the things that he's going to do throughout this fight is also summon some adds. When he summons adds, he's actually invulnerable to to attacks until you take out the adds that he's summoning. So keep that in mind. Those little rat enemies that he's going to summon, you need to take them out as quick as possible. Also, he does have that sphere. He's going to be shooting ice attacks at you as well, so you got to be careful of that. But go to the left or right, stay in those huts, and you should be okay. The weapon mod that he gives you, Blizzard, is an amazing weapon mod. If you're going to be running a Frostbite build, I'll show you some in another video, but the Blizzard mod is very, very good. It can do a lot of damage in a lot of area to a lot of enemies, and there's a few bosses bosses that it's very helpful on. All right, next up is a fight that features 2 Ixillis. It's going to be Ixillis 15 and 16, which is one of the world bosses of the courses section. This fight's not too bad. You are on a bridge and you can fall off the bridge, and if you fall off, that'll kill you. That's actually one of the most dangerous things about this fight, because he can knock you off. It's going to start with Ixillis 15. Now you can turn around immediately. I could turn to my right and shoot this cocoon and bring the second Ixillis into the fight early, and it'll be at 75% health. But I don't recommend that in your survival run, because let's just go ahead and focus and try to burst one down. Ixillis is resistant to corrosive damage. Its weak spots are its head, and it'll also be weak to fire damage if you want to bring that into the fight. One of the things that it'll spawn in are these lightning balls that kind of come at you. You can see them right here. When you're playing with multiple people, it's a good idea to have one player try to focus on those lightning orbs, because those will do a lot of damage. Now what you saw us do is try to burn one of the Ixillis down. I recommend trying to do that if you can dish out enough DPS. If not, it will kind of float away to the back, and then you'll be facing just one, and he'll be kind of on the other side. So you can see Ixillis 16 has now spawned on the other side. You saw him throw a corrosive bomb there. That's what he's throwing. He'll throw these bombs that'll land on the bridge. Not only do you want to dodge that attack, but it will leave a lingering corrosive area of effect on the bridge. So you definitely want to stay out of that. So this is just another playthrough. Now we've got 3 players, so you can see those corrosive bombs that he's throwing. Look up there, you see that little corrosive nest that's staying. Another attack that you're going to have to wary of is his diagonal slash. You saw that right there. He'll kind of do a wide sweeping dash all along the bridge. Now if you get hit by that, it does heavy damage, but it'll also stagger you and could potentially knock you back and knock you off the bridge. So you want to maintain focus on these, and you can easily see when it's charging up to do that attack. This is what I was saying earlier. See how it kind of goes far away, but we went ahead and just finished it off, because if you don't, you'll be focused on Ixillis 16, and eventually 15 will come back into the fight, and you'll be dealing with attacks from both sides. So it's best, if you can, to try and take one out. And again, if you have multiple players in survival mode, it's good to kind of designate a player to kind of maintain focus on these kind of lightning balls that are flying up, because these lightning orbs, not only will they do a lot of damage, but they will also stagger you and rip you back pretty quick. You're also seeing him shoot his weapon beam. That's that large beam that he shoots straight forward. That will pretty much knock you off if you get hit by it, unless you're like right up forward, right there. That staggers you back really, really far, so you definitely want to stay away from that. One of the other things that it could do is the Banshee Scream. You'll notice it if you see it. Basically, they'll be charging up a scream attack that does heavy damage, and you can critical their face in order to basically disrupt that attack. When you beat it, you'll get the Hive handgun, which is a really nice weapon because of the Hive shot, which fires like a projectile that creates a corrosive pool, and anything that touches that will do corrosive damage to it. It's really nice if you're going to use a corrosive build, and also creates a little AoE that will protect you. The next boss that we're going to cover is Mangler, and this is found in the Earth location, so he's one of the bosses you can find in the normal Earth routes. He is a root race enemy, so obviously that makes him resistance to kind of rot damage. His weaknesses are his eyes. He's also weak to fire damage, but I'll show you that corrosion really works really well against him as well. When the battle begins, he'll be in his small form and really be kind of passive. He's not really going to directly attack you a lot. He'll be underground and you can't really do much to him, but what he's going to be doing is spawning a lot of hollow adds in. Now the hollow adds aren't going to do a lot of damage to you unless you let a bunch of them kind of come in and overwhelm you. So just kind of keep doing your damage to him as you can. You don't really have to worry too much about him. He will try to a roll attack where he rolls on the ground and strikes you. It really doesn't even do that much damage. But after you get him to about 50%, he'll transform into a bigger form, and then he'll become a little bit more aggressive and also try to attack you more. He'll still have his old abilities, spawning in the hollows and obviously rolling underground and rolling around, but what he's really going to try to do is leap towards you, and when he does that, be ready for his melee combo. So if you see him kind of jump in the air right there, that's your point to roll dodge and kind of get away from him. So he's not too bad. That's really the only attacks that you have to worry about. But one of the things that I'll show you is how well corrosion damage works against him. So this is a different playthrough, and we're using the swarm ability, or the swarm weapon mod. If you can get the swarm weapon mod in survival mode, you will find a lot of the bosses become much more easier because it takes their armor way down. So we've got 3 people all using swarm and just applying corrosion stack 5 on this guy, and watch his health. it just dissipates. Before he's even really, you know, done transforming, he's pretty much dead. So corrosion, even though it's technically not a weakness for him, it does really well. Once you beat Mangler, you will get the Seed Collar weapon mod, which allows you to spawn up to 2 root hollows. This is really nice if you're going to run a minion, you know, a summon build. You can have those for 30 seconds. With Soul Anchor, you could double that time, and you can kind of have some mods that'll help you boost your summon damage. So it's really good if you're going to run a summon build. Again, we'll cover a lot of builds in a later video. Next up is one of the harder bosses in the game, Obryk the Shield Warden. This is part of the DLC, so he's actually going to be in the Elysium areas of your survival playthrough. He does have a weakness to his head, but you'll have to pop his helmet off before you could actually do the critical damage to his head, although that is technically his weak spot, so you'd have to kill that kind of bone helmet. He's also weak to fire damage and radiation damage, and he also has a resistance to frost damage. I really like using the beam rifle against this guy because I'm going to get that additional radiation damage, but he's very, very aggressive. He does a lot of heavy physical damage. You can see he kind of runs and does these shield attacks, which is a charge attack where he'll just charge you and then he'll just kind of shield slice. Another attack that you're going to see right here is the snow cover. He'll create a snow screen in front of you, jump through that, and try to attack you. So that's something you got to be aware of. He'll also do an ice explosion. That's what you're seeing right there, and you'll see kind of a lot of ice kind of coming out of the ground with this kind of purple aura. You need to roll dodge that, but also pay attention after he does that attack. Now he has a purple aura to himself. You're seeing how I'm close to him and I'm actually taking frost damage, even though I wasn't getting hit. When he does this ice explosion, he also enrages him, and when you get close to him in that phase, it will automatically do freezing damage to you. So whenever he has that kind of purple aura to him, try to stay away as best you can. Obviously, before the fight, using something like Spice Root will help you minimize that damage. You could also have him on the quick bar if you happen to get frozen, because keep in mind, if you're totally frozen, you can just instantly be killed. He'll also just do a 2-hit combo. You know, it's, you know, the charge attack is the 1 hit, but we'll sometimes kind of, you know, hit you with 1 slice and then jump and hit the ground. So that's something you got to be careful for. But he's very, very aggressive. He's going to be, you know, running at you throughout the entirety of the fight. If you need ammo, there are a lot of crates and things around the arena that you can blow up to get some additional ammo. But when you beat him, he's going to give you the weapon mod Frozen Mist, which will fire a frost damage projectile that creates a freezing cloud. Without any additional amplification, it'll last 10 seconds and apply frostbite to enemies within 10 meters, and it can stack up to 3 times with a direct hit. So that's pretty good if you're going to run a frost build. I don't really typically run frost builds in the survival mode because a lot of enemies are resistant and there's not a lot of enemies that are weak to it. But with that said, our next boss, Onslaught, actually is weak to frost damage. He's also weak to rot damage and fire damage and has resistance to shock damage. This is one of the bosses that are found on Yaisha of the Pan race. He's going to be found in the Widow's Pass and Noble's Rest kind of dungeon areas, and his main strategy is blink. Right at the beginning of the fight, he's going to use his blink ability and then immediately strike. That's his blink and strike attack. Another attack that he'll do is just his simple melee attack. You can see it right there. That does significant damage, and it has really, really good reach, so be aware of that. You may think you're out of reach and it'll still hit you, but the main thing that he's going to use is blink, and blink is going to allow him to disappear and essentially reappear anywhere on the battlefield. And throughout the battle, he's going to be spawning the same enemies that you encountered in Widow's Pass and Noble's Rest. He can spawn Risen, Solar, and Pan Assassin enemies that are all going to be causing problems throughout the fight. And what we like to do, especially if you're going to be running co-op 2 to 3 players, have one person really kind of maintain focus on the ads as they're seen, and then also the other player can kind of maintain focus on the boss. So you can see that my buddy has really just been kind of trying to keep his DPS on the boss, and until I cleared out all the remaining ads, then I came up and helped him out with the damage. So I cleared out everything, and then we're going to go up there and we're just going to finish him off. So he's kind of tough in the sense that he will blink around a lot, and that can kind of be a little bit annoying because you can't really maintain your DPS, but he's not really too challenging because the attacks he does doesn't do a lot of damage. Upon defeating him, you will get the blink token weapon mod. This is going to allow you to teleport, but also creates an electrical blast similar to what he does that damages enemies within 3 meters. It's really nice. Actually, you don't think it's nice, but it's not only good to hit a little bit of shock DPS, but also if you really need to get out of a situation really quickly, it's not a bad mod to use. Next up, we got Raze. This boss is in the ROM areas. This is an enemy that's going to be resistant to fire, radiation, and frost damage. Has 25% less fire and radiation damage, which is a pretty good resistance. So I'm using the beam rifle, which does radiation. Not the greatest idea, but we're kind of comboing a lot of things here in this particular video. He's not a strong boss at all. This is one of the easier boss to beat. He pretty much only does two things. He'll try to like scream and summon flying adds at you, and then he'll also shoot a volley of fire in your location. So whenever this starts, he'll generally be up there, you know, screaming a little bit, but you can see he's going to spawn a lot of Wasteland Skulls and some Blight Skulls. The Blight Skulls are really the ones that you got to worry about because they'll hit you and cause radiation damage on top of that. When he begins to open up, you can see that. That's when his critical spot is going to be available. It's the yellow core inside him when he's open. When you kind of get into the later part of this fight, you see he starts to shoot a fire of volleys that are fire damage in your direction, and those will start burning you pretty quickly, but you can roll dodge it pretty easily. This is a really easy fight. When you do beat him, you will get the Beckon weapon mod, which will allow you to summon a Wasteland Skull of your own. You can actually summon 2 of them, and they're pretty good. They're good at distractions. They don't do a lot of damage, but they're pretty decent if you run a summon build. Stepping into the Curse Station is probably one of the most challenging bosses in the survival mode, and that's going to be Riphide. Upon coming into this area, he'll kind of split into 2 forms, and that's essentially the essence of this fight. Basically, as you do damage to him, he will split 2 more times. Once he gets below 75% health, he's going to split again, so there'll be 4 forms of him, and once he gets below 50% health, all those forms will split again, and there will be now 8 forms of him. Riphide is a root enemy found in Leto's lab, obviously making him susceptible to fire damage, and he has resistance to rot and frost damage. Now there's multiple attacks that he can do, okay, and I'm going to break it down a little bit slowly. You see the one right there right in front of me just trying to do a melee, so they all have a melee ability. They also have a javelin throw where they'll throw javelin projectiles, and they'll also do these shockwaves, okay? This is the most dangerous thing. You see this red shockwave coming. You need to roll forward when he does that. If you roll backwards or to the side, it'll still hit you. And what makes that challenging is when you get to the 4 and 8 form versions, is all of them can be doing that. So when you get to the point of going into the 8 of them, you need to be ready to try and dish out as much damage as possible. The other thing that's going to happen is you see the glowing ones. Every once in a while, one will be glowing, and that will actually start healing other, Riphide's entire health bar. It's not healing other ones, it's kind of healing its entire health bar. So in phase 2, when there's 4 of them, 1 can be healing at a time. When you get to the 8 split, 2 can be healing at a time. So anytime you see one of them glowing, you need to be able to maintain focus. So what's really going to help you in this fight is having multiple ways to do damage to different things. So Iron Sentinels, you saw me there, is nice because it can do a lot of damage. Blizzard is a very nice mod because you can hit multiple people at once. You see, as soon as he split, I cast Blizzard and boom, I'm blowing them all up. So you need to be able to kind of dish out damage to any of them, and also be aware that all of them can be attacking you with melee javelins. So it's better to keep them kind of bunched up. Another scenario here, weak to fire damage, explosive shot mod, dealing tons of damage because it's hitting all of them. So that's a tough fight, but hopefully there's a little bit of tips that'll help you. You will get the Flicker Cloak weapon mod, which is really, really nice if you're running co-op and you're going to bring somebody in there that's going to kind of play a tank build, because it's going to give you a huge shield absorbing 80% of your max health from damage, and also prevents stagger. So if someone goes down, your tank can cast Flicker Cloak and revive people easily. Moving on to Skald and Sear. This is a boss that you could find in the Aisha region. It's a pan race. It's actually 2 separate bosses kind of together, Skald and Sear. Both of them are weak to headshot damage and rot damage. Both are very resistant to fire damage, 50% resistance to fire, so you really don't want to use fire against them. And they're also resistant to frost. Generally speaking, you want to focus your attacks on Sear, which is the flying enemy. He's got a lot less health, and he's a lot more aggressive, and he only has 1 attack. He'll basically be throwing fire bombs at you, and they don't do a lot of damage, but if you get hit by a bunch of them, then you could be burning a lot, and that burn damage can drop you down pretty quickly. You can see in this particular playthrough, this is actually our first boss of this particular survival run, so we don't really have a lot of mods, we don't really have a lot of weapons, right? I'm still here with the base pistol, and all I have is Iron Sentinels, but it's a good way to show the attacks that they do, because I'll show you a very easy way to beat this boss and make it not very threatening. We like to just go ahead and take out Sear, and you can see from where you entered into the arena, head to the right and get up on this platform that we're on right now, and generally speaking, once you take out Sear, Scald will not come up there, and Scald has crossbow that he does a lot of damage with, but he's not as aggressive. He's going to stay behind cover, he's going to kind of stay back, so you can actually stay up here and just kind of pick him off as he's behind this cover you can see right in front of me. Occasionally they will spawn in some Fleshapede adds into the fight, but they're not going to do a lot of damage, right? You can kind of sit back up there in that area and just focus your damage on him and take him down pretty easily. The only attack that he's going to be doing is launching that volley of arrows from his crossbow, which it can do a lot of damage if you get hit by it, but that area that I told you to stay in is a really nice area to remain and keep cover. The items that you're going to get from this is the Wildfire Shot, as well as the Black Rose Amulet, which is very nice kind of early on in survival mode. That's really going to help you out again early, probably not as much later, but early on it's going to make your armor piece, your chest armor, have its set piece increased by 1 automatically, so it's like wearing 2. So you can see I have 2 pieces of Elder on, but I'm actually getting the 3-piece bonus because I have the Black Rose Amulet. Again, that's good early on. Later on, you're probably going to replace it with something else. You'll also get the Wildfire Weapon mod. It's a really good weapon mod if you're going to run a Burning Fire build. It launches an arch of fireball that deals a lot of heavy damage, but also ignites and burns enemies within 2 meters. Very good. Also can be really good against Riphide, as I was talking about earlier. Alright, so we are moving past the halfway point, which brings us to Scourge. He's going to be found in the ROM areas of your survival playthrough. His weakness is really to fire damage. He's got a big resistance to radiation, but he'll also get a weakness to the kind of hive weapon that you can get from Ixillis 15 and 16. He will spawn some gassed adds throughout the fight, but essentially he's not really hard. It's a little bit more of an endurance because he generally does have a lot of health, but again, you see me use an explosive shot. That works really well because it counts as fire damage and it's got a high DPS, and it's really good to use high damage weapons against him because the way the mechanic works with Scourge, when you shoot him in the head, hives will spawn that are targeted at you and they will chase you down, and one will spot for every headshot that you take. So you can see them all kind of coming at me, and they don't do a lot of damage by themselves, but they hit you and they can stagger you, and then all of a sudden you can get hit by a lot of them if, say, you're using the Chicago typewriter. So it is better to use kind of single burst, high caliber weapons for this fight, in my opinion. It's very hard to revive your teammates in this particular fight. You're going to see that because a lot of radiation gets around them and all of a sudden they're killed pretty quickly. So it's going to kind of slow down a little bit. But one of the things I want to tell you about all those hives that come out from him, either from shooting him or when he does the attack that we'll talk about in just a minute, is they're very easily avoidable. You can kind of just strafe off in a direction and you'll be able to easily avoid them. Now, as he spawns these gassed adds throughout the fight, there's 2 things that you need to know about them. One, you can kind of clean them up, but whenever you kill them, you need to make sure you kind of get away from them, because when they die, they will explode, which does some damage, and again, more radiation damage. If you have 2 people alive, you can actually have one person just kind of kite one of the enemies around and he won't spawn any more in. If there's one alive, then he won't spawn any more of those adds in. So you can have somebody just kind of kite them around. There's 2 other kind of main attacks that you need to worry about. One's the hive attack, which you saw him doing just right there, where he'll protect himself in a large field, and he actually cannot take any further damage when he's in that protective state. Now, if he's burning down, has fire damage, that will continue to burn him a little bit, but you can see right there, boom, he got protected from that last explosive shot, and that actually saved him right there. But the explosive shot is really great. The other thing that he'll do is a claw attack. You've seen him do it several times with this fight. just be really careful of that. One, because it can go through walls, and it has a much longer reach than you realize. You're like, oh, I should be good, and then it still hits you, and it does a significant amount of damage. So be very, very careful and wary of that. But overall, it's not a bad fight. If you just kind of, you know, make a clockwise or counterclockwise rotation around the room, you should be okay. The mod that he's going to give you is the Breath of the Desert weapon mod. It's a very nice radiation weapon mod that's going to give 7 radioactive projectiles that you can fire towards an enemy and deal quite a bit of radiation damage. Very, very nice for a radiation build. Alright, so we're heading to the Hall of the Faithful. This is in the ROM section. We're going to be facing 2 bosses, Shade and Shatter. These enemies, their weak spot is their head. They're weak to corrosive damage, so Swarm will help you a lot if you use that weapon mod. They're also weak to shock damage, and they have a 25% resistance to radiation damage. They will spawn some lurkers in the fight. So there's 2 enemies, Shade and Shatter. I'm going to show you Shade first, and Shade essentially has ranged attacks. He's going to fire projectiles at you. You can see that. Once you do enough damage, you will see that Shade will conjure these small radioactive balls, and Shatter will run to him and create this shield around him. You just need to shoot that shield and dissipate that to kind of end that attack. During that phase, that's when the adds are coming in. Shade will also do what you're seeing right here. He'll conjure this radioactive ball, and it essentially does a lot of damage. You saw it hit me there. It does high damage, so if you don't have high health or high resistances, that will kill you. So let me show you now what Shatter will do. So we've kind of, that's really it. You know, Shade will kind of do those ranged melee, or sorry, those ranged projectiles, and also that radioactive ball. So Shatter, on the other hand, he's a melee guy, and he's just going to basically charge you and try to do a melee strike with his lance. So you saw that kind of as he charged at me. He'll also just do a basic melee attack with his lance. But also you're seeing this is the moment where they create that kind of radioactive shield, and you saw Shade boosting that, you know, shooting those radioactive balls around, and at that point Shatter will go back to him to try to, you know, blow those up and cause damage. But see, after that phase, he comes right back to attacking you. He'll also do a charge attack, or a lance explosion, I should say, where he strikes the ground with the lance, and that creates explosive damage, and that can do quite a bit of damage to you. But those are all the attacks they'll do. Basically, you know, a lot of people try to take down Shatter first, but to me it doesn't really matter which one you take down first. Just kind of burst both them down. But you'll get Veil of the Black Tear, which is an amazing weapon mod in survival mode, because it is going to create a tier that blocks projectile damage. You can shoot out of the tier, but they can't shoot in. So it's very, very good to enemies that have a lot of projectiles. Alright, next up we're heading into the Tainted Well, which is one of the dungeons you can come across in the Earth location. And we're going to be fighting Shroud, who's of the Root race. So like all the Root enemies, he is weak to fire damage, and his head is his weak spot. He will spawn in a bunch of adds in this fight, and there's a couple attacks that he'll do. He'll shoot a charged arrow at you, which is a 3-shot volley, and if that hits you, that can cause bleed damage. So you definitely want to stay away from that. You can keep some bandages with you in the fight, just in case you get hit by the bleed damage, so keep that in mind. But generally, after that attack, he's going to teleport away, and he'll go to a new location. So it's kind of hard to track. And if you have multiple enemies, what you really want is one player kind of focusing on Shroud, which is me right here, and the other enemies, or sorry, your other allies, focusing on the adds that are coming in. Because the adds can really overwhelm you if you're kind of, you know, just walking all over the place, because throughout the fight, he's going to be spawning in a bunch of devil adds. So throughout the fight, you're going to have one people kind of dedicated to adds. So in this particular fight, right, I'm dedicated to the adds. So I'm really trying to focus my enemies on, or my attacks on all the adds that are in the game first and foremost. So you can see I'm focusing on all those devil enemies and taking them down, and my ally is taking down Shroud. The other thing that Shroud can do is he'll do a bombardment attack. You're going to see that right here, where he's kind of charging his shot, and then he's going to hit with 3 consecutive explosions where you're at. And when he does that, all you really have to do is kind of just keep sprinting in any direction, and none of them will actually hit you. So he's not too bad. He's relatively easy as long as you kind of maintain your focus on him. One weapon mod that can help you is Mark, and you can mark him and you'll know exactly where he is. When you beat him, you'll unlock the Rattleweed weapon mod, which fires a projectile that summons a Rattleweed on impact, and it'll have 460 health and draw aggro on enemies within 13 meters. The thing is it doesn't really affect powerful enemies, aka the bosses. So it's not really a good weapon mod to use in survival, because we want to save our weapon mods for more powerful things that we can use against boss enemies. Alright, our next boss is a world boss, which is Singe. This is located in the Ash Yard. Again, every world boss that you come across will only be every third boss that you face in survival mode. Singe is one of them. He's found in Earth. He is a root enemy. His weak spot is chest. He's got like this bright area on his chest. It's hard to hit unless he's kind of standing up. He is resistant to fire damage and rot damage and frost damage. So he doesn't really have an elemental that he's weak to, but I will show you in a little bit that corrosion does wonders against him. Obviously, he does a lot of flame damage, so if you do want to bring some hydro coolant into the fight, you can. His main attack that you saw earlier was launching these fireballs. He'll throw 2 at a time. He'll also do a fire breath, which will kind of just spread in front of him. You can't dodge that attack, so be careful. You just need to be out of its range. You will see these oil kind of patches throughout the arena as well. If he happens to strike damage on those, then it will light on fire, and that oil patch will be on fire for the rest of the match. He'll also spawn some flame devils in. You see that right there. When you shoot them, they'll turn into immolators when you fire at them, but again, they're not too bad. You don't have to worry too much about them. You saw him charging up a little bit just a second ago. He will do that as well, and he'll actually charge at one of you and just kind of strike and then, you know, hit you with some melee attacks. His basic melee attack is actually a 4 combo, so be very wary of that. He'll do a 3 combo with his claws, and then he'll kind of jump at you. So you kind of have to keep roll dodging in order to stay out of that. So that's pretty much all of his main attacks. You really just kind of want to try to hit him in the chest as much as you can. He's not too hard of an enemy as long as you're roll dodging those fireball attacks and kind of staying away from him. But watch this. He's very, very susceptible to corrosion. Swarm is a great weapon mod that if you have it, you can see I've stuck 5 stacks of corrosion damage onto Singe as well as bleeding, and his health is just dissipating. So you can really do a lot of damage with corrosion damage as well as bleeding. Again, he is resistant to fire, rot, and frost, so if you're going to try to bring an element into the fight, those are the 2 to bring, and they can do wonders. As you can see right there, you can really clean him up really fast. You can see that whole fight was probably less than a minute. Nonetheless, when you do kill Singe, you're going to get the Spitfire weapon. This is a pretty nice weapon. It's going to be in your pistol slot. It also has a flamethrower weapon mod that will inflict burning and deal fire damage over time. So it's very nice if you're going to run a fire build or you're going up against a boss that is susceptible to fire damage. Alright, let's head back to Yaisha to deal with another member of the Pan Priesthood, and that is going to be Stormcaller. Stormcaller is found in the Martyr's Garden section. This enemy is weak to rot and frost damage, and he is resistance to shock damage, a big resistance, 25% actually. He'll spawn a lot of enemies in with him, a lot of adds that are going to help him throughout the fight. You're going to have to deal with some glaive throwers, some Pan Thunder Tusks, and some Pan Swordmen, and those guys are going to give you more trouble than the actual boss himself. He doesn't move very fast, as a lot of the Pan Priesthood kind of enemies don't, but he has a lot of powerful sorcerer abilities, and he's going to try to hit you with Lightning Strike and Lightning Orbs. And the Lightning Strike will come out of the sky and strike down, and that can stagger you and do quite a bit of damage. And also, the Lightning Orbs will kind of go along the ground, and there'll be multiple of them. So you're going to see this right here, and I totally messed this up. So you can see all these lightning orbs kind of coming, hitting me in the feet. You can shoot those to dissipate them, but really you just want to kind of keep moving and stay away from them. Right there is his just lightning strike attack. Just boom, he's going to hit you real quick with that out of his kind of lance there. So that's something you got to be wary of. Honestly, this is a really poor example of this boss because I'm doing a lot of what I'm saying you shouldn't do, and that is kind of getting too close and not moving enough. So I was getting hit by the lightning strikes, I was getting hit by the lightning orbs, and quite frankly, I got pretty lucky just to beat him. But those are really the only attacks that he does, is the strike and the lightning orbs. As long as you keep your distance and keep moving, he's not too bad of a boss, and he's very susceptible to bleed damage. So if you have something that can cause bleed, that'll help you a lot. The mod that he's going to give you is the Stormcaller mod, which is basically the lightning orb attack that he was doing. So it's going to create an electro storm around you and discharge lightning strikes that do shock damage to nearby enemies, but also it reduces incoming damage by 50%. So it's a really nice way to dissipate damage and a very nice way to dish out damage if you have a lot of rings and amulets that might be boosting your shock damage. Next up is going to be another world boss encounter that you can potentially get throughout your survival playthrough, and that's going to be the Int. He's found in the Choking Hollow, which is part of the Earth section of this game. His weak spot is his back. He's got a large area on his back that does 200% extra damage if you hit it. He's also weak to fire damage, as most root type enemies are, and he's resistant to rot damage and frost damage. He's not really that challenging of certainly any of the world bosses in the game, but of the bosses you're going to encounter throughout your survival run, this one's not too bad to get. One of the attacks that he's going to do right here, you can see he's going to do a hand slam where he'll slam the ground and he'll send the shockwave towards you. You can either get out of the way or roll dodge it, either way that you want to. He does have a basic kind of melee attack. It's very slow. You can see it right there. He kind of has this sweeping motion if you're going to get too close to him. Throughout the fight, he'll also scream. You're seeing that right here. That will stagger you, but at the same time, he's going to launch a bunch of adds. He's going to be spawning hollows and root warts to kind of join in the fight. Again, they don't have a lot of health. They're very easy enemies to kill, so they shouldn't really be causing you too much problem. So what he'll do as well is he'll kind of reach over and launch. You saw him kind of lean over, and he's on his hands and knees almost. And at this time, he's just launching explosive bombs around the map to try and hit you. And that's when you're really, your best chance is to hit him in his weak spot on the back. But really, you just want to keep moving throughout that. Another thing that you can do, I don't show it in this video, but if you were to just maintain all your fire on one of his legs, you can actually blow one of his legs off, and then he'll be crawling around. So that might happen to you, and it actually will change the drop that you get for finishing the fight. And I'll mention that in just a little bit. But essentially, if you do kind of just fire at his legs, eventually you would blow it off. And that, again, will change the fight just a little bit. It slows him down. He doesn't walk around as much. But really, he's not too threatening. As long as you kind of roll dodge through these shockwave type attacks, and then you don't get staggered and overwhelmed by the hollows and the root warts, then you really shouldn't have too much trouble with the fight. Now, when you do kill him, again, if you blow his leg off, you'll actually get the Petrified Maul, which is a melee weapon that does heavy rot damage. It's actually pretty nice, but a lot of people prefer to not take his legs out so you can get the Spore Bloom gun, which has the Spore Shot, and it fires an explosive round that deals rot damage within 3 meters, and also leaves a gas cloud that slows enemies for 7 seconds. So that's really nice against some of the bosses that have a lot of adds that are coming at you. So it's a pretty fun weapon to use. Moving on to the Harrow. Harrow is found in the bunker in the ROM location of the survival mode, and just of the game in general. This boss is actually one of the easier boss. He looks kind of scary and he's very aggressive, but he doesn't have that many attacks and he's pretty easy to defeat. He is weak to corrosive damage, so corrosive will do 15% extra damage, and he's resistant to radiation damage, so he's got a 25% resistance there. He doesn't have too many attacks. He is aggressive, and his attacks have a longer range than you kind of really realize with these kind of large, kind of leaping claws that are coming out of his fingers. But he essentially will do two things. He'll either charge at you and try to strike you, or he'll do a 3-attack combo. So you can see he's charging at my buddy there. But essentially, once you drop him away from 50% health, he will kind of run away, and at this time he's going to spawn adds. And honestly, this is the most dangerous part about this fight. And if you want to make it easy, just go to the central platform and kind of keep looking around in circles so you can see where the adds are coming from. He's going to spawn a lot of gas and lurkers at this time. And if you get overwhelmed by the adds, this is probably what will kill you more than the actual boss himself. So come to the center of the room and then just kill all the adds, and eventually the Harrow is going to return to the fight, and you can focus your attention back on the Harrow and finish him off. Again, he doesn't really do a lot of damage. He doesn't have that many attacks that you need to worry about. If you want to, he does technically kind of have a weak spot to his legs. Like if you want to shoot him in the legs, that will stagger him a bit, but it's not really necessary. Defeating the Harrow is going to reward you with the Defiler weapon that comes with the Radioactive Volley mod, which fires a volley of 6 radioactive projectiles that will actually bounce off the environment and deal radiation damage to everything they hit. I'm not a big fan of the weapon, so I actually prefer, if you're building a radiation build, just to use the Breath of the Desert weapon mod that you get from Scourge, and you can put that on any weapon that you prefer. I think it's a little bit better. Nonetheless, moving on to our next boss, which is going to be the Ravager, found in the Tempest Court. This is in one of the Yaisha sections of the survival mode and just of the locations in general. His weak spot is going to be his head. He's also weak to rot damage and frost damage, and he has a 25% resistance to shock damage, so don't want to really use a shock build against him. he doesn't have too many attacks. One of his main ones that he uses, that the charge attack that you just saw, he'll just charge at you and bite you right here, boom. And it's pretty quick. I get hit by it almost every single time in this fight. What you really want to do is actually dodge forward when he charges at you to try to avoid that. Eventually he'll kind of leave the fight, and when he leaves, he's going to pick up some adds. He's going to bring back some archers and some pan swordmen. They're going to be on his back. You can kind of shoot them while they're on his back. Eventually they'll hop off and kind of get into the fight. This is another attack that he's going to do. He's going to kind of charge up, jump, and hit the ground with a thunder strike. It's going to cause a lot of lightning damage in that area. Again, he is quick. See, that charge bite is so fast. You don't want to dodge backwards like I'm doing. You want to dodge forward. So take my advice, and you won't get hit as many times as I am. The other attack is just that claw strike. You're seeing that right there, just kind of his basic melee attack. And that's really all of the attacks that he does. You do get some downtime, you know, when he leaves to go, you know, quote, go get the adds, I guess. That's really a good time for you to heal up in case you're pretty hurt by the fight. So you have some opportunity to kind of heal up, especially in multiplayer, because he, you know, if you're co-op, he'll certainly kind of hone his focus onto one player. As you saw, he was really kind of focused on me the whole time. So overall, I don't think he's too challenging of a boss. If you just kind of maintain your focus and dodge his claw strikes and kind of look out for that charge attack, you should be okay. The weapon you're going to get is the Curse of the Jungle God for beating him. This is a great weapon to use if you're going to build a lifesteal and shock build. Kind of combine those two, because the mod itself launches a projectile that summons a tentacle that not only deals shock damage, but also steals a percentage of the hero's max health per hit. So it's very, very good, and it lasts 30 seconds. So it's really good to use if you want to run kind of a lifesteal shock build. So moving on to our next boss, which is the Thrall, found in Must Forge. This is one of the areas in Corsus. This is an Iskall enemy. This enemy is where you're going to get, in my opinion, the best mod to use in survival. So if you can get this boss early, that is great. His weak spot is his head, and he's also susceptible to radiation damage. I'll show you that in a little bit. You can really destroy him with radiation damage. You saw his first attack that he can do there, which is the Corroded Sting, where he just kind of shoots a corrosion bullet out of his staff. Obviously that does damage and will put corrosion on you, so you will subsequently be taking more and more damage. Throughout the fight, one of the most dangerous things he's going to be doing is spawning in Banshee adds. These are adds that can do a significant amount of damage. They have a 3 and 4 hit strike, and they can kind of lunge at you and close the distance pretty quickly. So be very, very careful, because these enemies can do a lot of damage. In fact, more so, you know, from the boss, because the boss has generally corroded you. But nonetheless, let's get back to the boss. So one of the things that the boss can do also, you'll see him kind of charge. This will create this corroded bombardment, and you're seeing these kind of corrosion things kind of just explode. You just need to keep moving so that you don't get hit by those, because not only those can continue to corrode you, but they can also stagger you a little bit. Another attack that he may do is the Irradiated Cloud. So that's what you're seeing right here. Pretty noticeable, right? Creates a large kind of AoE of corrosion damage. So this can kind of separate you and him, because the other thing that he can be doing is just teleporting around in the battle, and you know, you may not know where he is when that corrosion's gone, and he'll be spawning a lot of adds as well. So remember, as I mentioned earlier, irradiation damage does a lot to him. So we hit him with 5 corrosion from my buddy's corrosive aura ability, and look at that irradiation damage. You can absolutely smoke the Thrall with radiation. If you have the ability to bring the beam rifle into this fight, you definitely should. The mod that he's going to give you, I think, is probably the best mod in the game, Swarm. This is going to basically surround you. When you get near an enemy, it will seek them within 20 meters and just repeatedly attack them, dealing corrosive damage, and it lasts 15 seconds, and it recharges pretty quickly. So you can get 5 stacks of corrosion on enemies and say, you know, put bleed on them on top of that. It's a great ability. You should definitely be using it. And I'll definitely show you how good it works as we're facing our next boss, the Unclean One, who is found in Corsus. This boss is not too bad. He can dish out a lot of damage, though, if you're not careful. His weak spots are actually his butt, and he's also weak to corrosive damage. So that Swarm mob we just got is really helpful. He is resistant to frost damage. You know, I tend not to use many frost builds in this game mode, but look, I'm hitting him with that Swarm. He's getting corroded. Look at that health dissipate as he does his first kind of attack that you saw, which is just a weapon leap, where he'll jump in the air at you and kind of slam his weapon down on you. He'll also do the 3-hit combo that you just saw there. That's just his general melee attack, and he does that. It's got, you know, bigger reach than you think. But the main attack that he's going to do is the weapon Whirlwind, and this can actually last for quite some time. But you saw we hit him with all those swarms and then put some fire damage on top of him, and he's pretty much bled out without us even having to do much else to him. So that swarm mod really can destroy people, especially when they're weak to corrosive damage. But there's not really much else to him. One of the other attacks that he can do, he can actually throw his weapon at you, so kind of keep an eye out for that. If he does throw it at you, he will then go pick it up, and when he picks it up, that'll give you actually a chance to kind of take those critical shots in his buttocks. I don't really focus on the weak spot too much because you really have to stay on the move with this boss. The one thing that's going to get you in trouble if you're trying to just stand still, especially in this whirlwind, the whirlwind will eventually end. He does it for quite some time, but if you aren't in the position to say take him out while he's doing it, it will eventually end, and he'll kind of stand there ready to be shot a couple times after that. Keep in mind that all the pots around the room are also filled with ad enemies, so as he's doing that, you saw those ads coming out. Not only does he release them, but he can also kill them too, so you can actually steer here, the Unclean One towards the ads, and that whirlwind will actually kill them throughout the fight, as well as damaging you. The reward you'll get for beating him is the Skewer weapon. It's a pretty good single caliber weapon that does a lot of damage with a heavy hitting weapon mod Skewer, and it also applies bleeding to enemies for 20 seconds as well as staggering them. So it's something that can dish out a lot of damage, especially if you run a bleed build with like the Fan of Knives and you get that razor wire necklace. You're gonna have some fun. Moving on to the Warden, this boss is found in the Aisha location of the game in the Halls of Judgment, which leads to the Ring of Trials. This boss isn't too bad. His weakness is to rot damage and frost damage. He has a resistance to shock damage, but also another weakness is these bells that he throws. So he'll throw a bell spear that does two things. It spawns ads until it's destroyed, so you want to kill it as fast as possible, because while it's there, archers and pan swordsmen will be coming into the fight. But also, when you kill that bell spear, you also get a damage boost against him. So that's one thing that he does, his bell lance. He'll also just throw a normal lance at you. You can roll dodge that, and his melee combo is actually a 3-hit melee combo. So we'll show that again because we beat this guy pretty quickly. But again, if you see those lances with the bells on them, go ahead and take them out. Corrosion works really good against him. You can see we've got 5 stacks of corrosion on him, which allows you to just dish out a lot of damage, and you can drop the Warden pretty quickly. Generally in co-op, you kind of have one person really dedicated to making sure they're taking out the bell lances. As long as you do that, you can kill him pretty quickly, and you can roll dodge away from his 3-hit combo, and that's really all you got to worry about. He's a pretty easy boss. You shouldn't have too much trouble if this is a boss that you encounter throughout your playthrough. Whenever you beat him, you will get a great weapon mod, the Song of Swords, which casts an aura around the caster that gives you and all your allies inside that aura a damage boost by 15%, and it moves with you. That's the great thing, so you can move around with that aura and get that 15% damage boost. Really, really nice. Alright, we're progressing on. We're getting near the last few bosses, and in this one we're going to be covering Tian the Assassin. He is found in Resium, part of the DLCs, in Valenhag Mines. He's a nice enemy if you face because he's got a great weapon mod that can help us in a bleed build. He is weak to headshots, fire damage, and radiation damage. Radiation, not a lot. It gives you like a 5% boost, but it is a little bit of a buffer. And he's also resistant to frost damage. He will spawn some Blade Masters in the fight with him. The main things that he's going to be doing is he's going to be throwing these spinning daggers, and those daggers will track your location, and they can do a significant amount of damage. But look at what fire damage can do. If you burn him, it really causes a constant effect of him and works really, really well. So I'm using Wildfire Shot right now, and that really does a lot of good damage. So if you have that mod, it's a good thing to use because it's burning, and when you do a lot of damage, what he's actually trying to do, and I'll show you in the next clip of a different fight, he's trying to jump away and land on these platforms in the back and continue to throw daggers at you. But because I got him burning, he kind of jumps up there and gets interrupted in his escape, so to speak. So I'll show you that a little bit differently. One of the things about this fight, you can see we're hanging to the left-hand side of the entrance, kind of behind this pillar. There's this large pillar that we're kind of hanging back. It gives you a lot of cover from his spinning knives, so you can kind of get back there, you can kind of get cover and stay away from things that are coming at you. You can also give you a clean way to, you know, kill ads as they're kind of tunneled in your direction. It kind of is a safe place to stay. So I do recommend staying up on this platform and using this pillar that you can see right here to my right for cover when you need it. Nonetheless, the spinning daggers are really the main thing that you're going to see him doing. He does also that leap attack that you just saw, where he'll leap towards you and just kind of slice his hands, dealing damage. He also just does a basic melee attack. But the main thing that he's going to be doing is jumping back to these platforms and throwing those spinning daggers. When he screams like you just saw him scream, that's going to be spawning in the Blade Masters. The Blade Masters that come in to help him, they don't have a lot of health, so you can easily dispatch of them pretty quickly. But if you don't kill them, you know, you can get overwhelmed because a lot of ads all of a sudden can be on the board. The great thing about this fight is getting the Fan of Knives weapon mod. This is one of the best weapon mods in the game. You get 2 of them, and you can throw 7 knives per throw that deal damage and apply the bleeding effect that lasts for 20 seconds. Really great against bosses, and really good if you get, say, the Razor necklace and some other things that boost your bleed damage. It's a great mod to have. Alright, the second to the last boss that we're going to cover that you can encounter in survival mode is Totem Father. This is a world boss found in the Aisha location, so you can get him every 3rd round, technically. He's not too bad, especially for a world boss. He's the pan race. He's got weaknesses to his headshots. He can do critical damage there. He's also weak to rot damage and frost damage, but he does have a pretty significant resistance to shock damage. So what he's going to do is he's essentially going to be jumping around on these columns in this circular arena, and from up there he's going to either shoot a double ball of energy, you just saw that, there he can just kind of throw it at you. The main thing that he's going to be doing is jumping down from those columns and just sticking a totem in the ground, and while this totem is in the ground, it will be spawning ads into the fight, which can either be the archers or the pan swordmen, depending on the totem that he has activated. But essentially you just need to kill that totem as quickly as possible to prevent getting overwhelmed with ads. And then once he hits that down, he'll generally jump back up to the columns, and while he's on the columns, again, he's going to be throwing those energy balls. He'll also do a boulder throw, which I'll show you in just a second. So those are the only things that he's going to be doing from the columns, so you should be able to dish out damage to him pretty freely without worrying too much about getting hit. Now when he is on the ground, he can certainly do some melee attacks. He does have a 2-hit combo with his claws that you definitely need to try and avoid if you can. So there you go, there's the energy ball attack that he did again. He's just going to shoot an energy ball at you. Very easy to see coming. You can dodge all of his attacks pretty easy. The other attack that he does, he conjures this large boulder. You can see it just at the top there, and he throws it at you. Again, it's a pretty slow attack. You can see it coming, and you should be able to roll dodge it pretty easily. When you're playing in co-op, you generally want to have kind of one person that says, okay, I'll be focusing on the totems when he comes down. You just keep peppering the Totem Father, keep doing damage, and I'll make sure that the ads and the totem are basically taken care of. So in this playthrough, that's right here, was what I was doing. You saw me taking those out, and my partner was still shooting him. So it's not too bad. You should be able to take this one out pretty easily. If you do beat him, you will get the Eye of the Storm, which is a great weapon that has an excellent weapon mod, static field shot, that fires a shock damage projectile that also applies overload on enemies and will then explode if they get within 4 enemies of another person that's overloaded. So it's really good in situations where there's a lot of enemies in a small area. Alright, so we have finally made it to our 28th and final boss that you can encounter in survival mode, and that is Brudvaak and Vargr. This is actually 2 separate enemies, and in fact when you kill one, the other one will enrage. This boss is found in Resium, specifically in the Crimson Hold. So Vargr is the creature that Brudvaak rides, and Varg's weak spot is his tail. He is also weak to fire damage and radiation damage. He's also going to have a resistance to frost damage. Brudvaak, on the other hand, he's the rider. His weak spot is his chest/belly area. He's also weak to radiation damage, and he's got a resistance to fire and frost damage. So when the fight starts out, Brudvaak will be riding Vargr, and mainly what they're going to do in this particular stance is just kind of charge at you, and they'll basically do a bite attack whenever they reach you. Pretty quickly though, they will separate, because as soon as one of them gets under 75% health, Brudvaak will jump off and Vargr will go underground. Now my buddy is using the Mark weapon mod, which is really nice because it kind of marks the enemies. But when Brudvaak is kind of off of Vargr, he can do a couple things. One is this leap attack, which you're seeing him do right there. So you kind of want to just keep your distance from him. He does have a ranged attack where he can fire either fire or kind of frost projectiles out of this kind of gun on his arm. So be wary of that. They are pretty slow. If you keep your distance, you should be able to dodge them pretty easily. Nonetheless, after a period of time, Vargr will return to the surface and Brudvaak will again ride him. Now, this is another attack that they can do. It's kind of a dual attack where Brudvaak is firing his projectiles and then Vargr is just screaming, and they'll kind of use the same element damage. So he was just kind of screaming this frost damage forward, and Brudvaak was shooting his ice projectiles forward. So they can do that in combination with each other, and that's a pretty dangerous moment. Nonetheless, what most people like to do is kill Vargr first, because Varg's pretty hard on his enraged form. So a lot of people like to take him out first. I'll show you fighting him if you take out Brudvaak first, but most people are going to take out Vargr, which leaves you with Brudvaak, and he's going to be enraged, and essentially his attacks are going to be relatively the same. So there he is doing his leap attack, and then you also saw him do his ranged volley attack right there where he's shooting he shot frost damage that time. This is the other attack that he can do, which is basically called a siege attack, and I'm getting hit by it. He'll raise his kind of thing up in the air, and that's going to trigger people who are outside of the map, I guess, to launch a volley of fire or frost arrows into the battlefield. So if you see him kind of put his thing up and charge, be wary that those are going to kind of be coming into the fight. He's not too challenging though if you kind of keep your distance. In his rage form, he's essentially just faster, and he does a little bit more damage, but just aim at his chest or belly and you should beat him. Now if you do it this way, you're going to get the chain strike, chain blade melee weapon, which is pretty cool because it allows you to hit kind of quick attacks, but also if you charge your attack, it'll extend the chain and it can hit multiple enemies. So it's really good against some of the dungeons that have a lot of little enemies, and you can hit all of them with that chain attack. Now on the flip side, let's say you decide to kill Brudvaak first. That's going to leave you facing Vargr alone in his enraged form, and this is much more dangerous. I don't recommend doing it this way. One, the weapon that you get's not really that good, but also this is a lot more challenging than facing Brudvaak in his enraged form. So the thing that Vargr will do, he'll go under the ground, but now when he's underground, the path that he's taking sometimes will leave this fire trail behind him, and that will burn you. It can do continual damage to you, so that's something you want to stay away from. When he's above ground, he'll do the same charge attack that he does whenever Brudvaak was riding him, except he'll just keep charging. So you see that right now, he's just charging, 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 and he's also leaving that fire trail behind him, so I have to stay out of that trail or I'm going to be burning and take continuous damage. So I have to kind of stay away from him and also avoid his bite attack when he's getting at the end of his charge. He will typically only target one person during that entire phase though, so if you are playing co-op, the person that's kind of evading, just focus on evading, and then the other player hopefully is dishing out a continual amount of damage during that time. He'll also go back underground. When he's underground, you just want to kind of keep moving around, because when he does come back out of the ground, that can hit you for a large amount of damage and stagger you. He'll also do his same siege attack that when Brudvaak was firing his projectiles and he was doing that ice breath. He'll do that same attack that you saw there. It's not dodgeable. The only way that you can avoid that is to be out of the range of it. So you need to kind of maintain your distance if you see him trying to charge up that attack. So hopefully that helps. This is a more difficult fight. It's one of the DLC fights. If you choose to do it the way where you're fighting Vargr second, you're going to get the alternator weapon, which isn't really a good weapon. It doesn't do a lot of base damage. Now the weapon mod that it gets, Incinerator, is pretty nice if you're running a fire build, because it shoots a lot of fireballs that deal fire damage and also ignites enemies, burning them and dealing continuous fire damage over time. So that's good. The problem with that weapon is that the base weapon is not very good. So that's why a lot of people don't really like it. So unless you're running a fire build where you're going to get to use that mod a lot, it's not a great weapon to use. So that's all 28 bosses that you could potentially come across in survival mode. I hope you guys found that helpful. This is going to be paired up with my builds video. So right now this is one of my builds where this is like a tank health regen build where your health is just continuously regenerating and you're almost unkillable. But I have, I'm going to try to pair that up with this video to help you guys get through survival mode and get the achievement to kill 10 bosses in a run. And hopefully you guys are finding this helpful. And as always, if you guys like my stuff, feel free to like and subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video.